Okay, once again, I see the number of you has even grown. So some of the word is getting out that this is something worth participating in, and I see more faces I hadn't seen before, and a few more people online, which I didn't recognize these names. So it's good to know that I've got some of you thinking about how this might affect you, and you're willing to tell other people about it also, and I thank you very much for that. And we're going to go into chapter 6 right now, which has an interesting title called Pattern Recognition. It's actually sort of an academic title that the people who work in this field, they call it pattern recognition because they review all kinds of patterns in life and try to figure out what that means. For us, it really comes down to personal preferences. It really boils down. We're going to take a look at why people and how people take a different view of so many of the same things in life that it actually causes us problems in getting things done. So, by definition, a pattern can be an archetype, a model, an ideal worth of imitation, a representative sample of something, or a composition or a composite of traits and features, characteristics of individuals. All biological life forms maintain and exhibit patterns of activity. We know that about ourselves. We know about other animals, and even plants have their own patterns of activities. And all of this is inextricably linked to what we see in the behavior. We see the behavior. When we see the behavior, we know there's a cause and effect that a certain behavior is being seen. The cultural expectations, documented methodologies, and established practices that form our human experience and interpersonal and organizational relationships are the artifacts of inherited tendencies and learned values, beliefs, and experiences previously programmed into our computer life minds. So we are basically very, very programmed from the learning and knowledge, nature and nurture that has caused us to be the way we are. The pattern recognition competency focuses on our ability to recognize those pre-programmed aspects and preferences of ourself and others, and on the need for us to better manage our reasoning based on the why and how we think, learn, know, lead, and pursue certain objectives in all our societal behaviors. Pattern recognition combines with systems thinking to ensure more effective situational learning, which happens to be the next lesson.
Let's start right here, the pattern recognition. Pick it back up with the pattern recognition competency.
Just the second part right here. The pattern recognition competency focuses on our ability to recognize those pre-programmed aspects and preferences of ourselves and others, and on the need for us to better manage our reasoning based on why and how we think, learn, know, lead, and pursue certain objectives in all our societal endeavors. Pattern recognition, this one, plus the previous one with systems thinking, leads to better situational learning, and situational learning is the next lesson. And once again, I know that you've seen this before, but there is time between us seeing these lessons. Once again, it's all about you, where you are, who you are, how you think about things, and what you want. That's your diagram. My piece of this is I'm saying you can get that if you follow the line of thinking here, and I'm talking about pattern recognition right now. I'm also talking about something that's new. It's a new idea, concept I created a few years back called the University of the Mind. Because when you're doing this kind of business, you're wondering how many dimensions there could be between how people are alike and how they are different. And what would be the basis for people being alike and different? One of the ways you can do that is turn to your local university and think of how educators across the whole breadth of all disciplines and topics have decided to organize life They've decided it belongs in certain categories. And like most universities, a big university has room for a department of business, a department of education, a department of humanities. It has something for science. It has visual arts, public administration, health and human services, and even other things. And all these things fall under them. So somebody says that you take 2 or 3 of them and they fall under this, and 2 or 3 of those and they fall under this. Somebody has already organized a hierarchy of how to think about topics. Somebody's decided that if you're in engineering, you don't really need to know too much about social work, or you don't need to know about anything about women and gender. It might be that those topics have some relationship, but it's not important enough to build a field around it. But the very people who have done that, they have already decided how people will think about these fields. And there have been notable fields, as I've read, that have been against this for a long time, going back maybe 100 years. John Dewey, guy created the Dewey Decimal System, was really against this because he felt that when you started chunking things up and differentiating them so much, what happens is there's always something lost when you pull them apart, because there's a connective tissue that's being torn and will no longer be seen because people will be specialists in their own area, and that something's fallen away by the connective tissue. Hence, this program, the American Learnership Forum, is focused on interdisciplinary, integral thinking, learning, knowing, and leading, which means to say that you look in places for additional things that you would not normally look for. So if we're working on problems, somebody might say, what is the ecological impact of doing brain surgery? Who would think that anybody would care about the ecology in doing brain surgery? Well, it just so happens that people do worry about where you dispose and how you dispose of brain tissue that's taken out of human beings. And there's a whole bunch of rules and regulations on how that happens, but you don't learn it really generally as you're learning to operate on a brain. And you don't learn it in your ecological studies, but it's there. So there are connections going on between these things that we don't necessarily think of. My view, my personal view, is I think you can find lots of connections that when you bring them up, it at least provides an opportunity for innovation. When you are solving certain problems, you might actually be correcting or fixing other things that need attention at the same time you're working on something. That happens a lot in laboratories. They try to do something and somebody finds out that something else really has been impacted. And of course, people are trained to be innovators, to look at how things correlate and things like that. So that's an important aspect, I think, of the human brain, as just to be a replication, that if you can replicate, if you could take this thing and download it from a computer with all the essential pieces and just put it in your brain, how easy that would be if you didn't have to actually even go to school to do it. You just put it in there as a database. And if you didn't like that one, you just pull the plug out and you put a new one in. Okay, so you can choose the database you want. Now, that brings us to the brain. And this, for those of you who are in the audience, you're going to say, I thought he'd be finished about this time, but I have to tell you, this was one of the more complicated ones and one of the most important things you could ever know in life right now coming up. First of all, the frame in which this brain here lies. This frame is made up of a number of psychological instruments and how they work to help people discover who they are and who they're not. If you've ever heard of, if you know something about Myers-Briggs typology, the typology of Myers-Briggs, and the basic 4 functions were thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensing. They're diametrically opposed because they are the opposite. And some people have strong thinking and very weak feeling, and vice versa. So we have that frame on the outside because everything we talk about on the inside is going to be affected by the frame. The second thing is, this is a brain that if you were to slice it down the middle, it has a left side because it's looking forward and the right side. We know through many studies that the activities and the logic of the right side are different than the activities and the logic on the left side. And we call this the zone of lifelong balance and growth, which is a cerebral mechanism in the brain, and that's where you accumulate and store an awful lot of what you know. But up in the front lobe, the frontal lobe, is the executive function where most of your decisions are made that require thinking and the use of information to think better. And that also is split on the left-right side too. So what I'm telling you is I'm just giving you the basic physiology of the brain, but that brain is being read by people who created the Myers-Briggs typology, and they know that there are 16 different, clearly different types of people. And this would call them, to chart them into 4 categories. It doesn't have everybody on here, but it would be 4 categories. And the second one is, a place where I've done my own study, is in left brain and brain wholeness studies by one of the gurus who created this field. And the whole idea that the left brain has linear thinking responsibilities and the right brain has conceptual and thinks in pictures and tones and music and so forth. And those are different, but they work together. They are physically separated, but there's a corpus callosum that pulls them together. So you're never really just doing one or the other, but some people rely very heavily on their left, some people rely very heavily on their right. So that's the second psychological dimension. The other psychological dimension has to do with these colors. This is about the latest stuff that I've become aware of, and it's stuff that's called spiral dynamics. And it has to do with 8 categories of culture, of memes. Culture and memes have to do with things that we live in, and we agree that there are certain ways of doing this, which is different than doing that, which is different being accepted this way. So it's about your memes, and the memes can be memes that are all about sensing and feeling, or they could be memes about thinking and intuition, or they could be memes that have to do with the right side of the brain, or memes that have to do with the left side of the brain. I have no idea if anyone has ever tried to put that on a single graphic. I have never seen anything like that. It just happens my work experience caused me to have to try to do that. And what I'm telling you is it doesn't make any difference if what I have here is exactly scientifically correct or drawn. As long as it's plus or minus about 25%, we know that there are patterns of groupings. That's the only thing I'm making. Now, secondarily, here's what happens. There's a tension right through here. People who tend to be subjective in their thinking tend to be mostly driven by their feeling type and maybe a little bit by their intuition. But for sure, they're not driven by good thinking. Crystal clear, deep thinking has to do with analytical mind and like accounting practices. People down here who are good sensors, what they focus on and what they care about and what they want is they want stability as far as the language that they use, the past that they're part of. They don't really want to be involved with people who are always looking for change and wanting to make something new happen. They want their culture, their religion, their town, their place, and that's it. They don't want somebody else's notion of what it is. So what I'm saying to you here is when you put all these together, we start to be able to solidify the types of people. Extrovert, sensor, feeler, perceiver, as opposed to seek and organize. STJs are organized people. My only point of it is to bring to your attention that there are people who do psychological studies, some of whom wouldn't agree between those or that I have them perfectly placed. But there are groupings of people who are different, and if you have no sense of that, you are at a disadvantage. If you don't have the ability to use this language to some degree to say, I see why we're different, I see why we're the same, you are at a deprivation of the ability to make friends and build teams and just get along because you don't know how to accommodate other people. This is critical for team building, that you at least respect that people are different. So some people in the room might be the same, but not exactly like you. But some could be so different that it would blow your mind that they're in the same room or the same field. Why this is complicated is that it causes complexity. It means that the people can't be counted on to stay in their zone even. Because some people say, well, I don't want to be in that zone. I want to be in somebody else's zone. So the great thinker over here might decide just to love up his whole family and be a great lover. So people play a game of saying, I'm more than a one-dimensional person. Now, you don't always know where a person is when you're dealing with that person. I put these on here: cerebral assimilator, limbic accommodator, the right diverger, and the left converger. The reason is there is a theory of education that has to do with people like to learn differently. They learn differently as far as how they physically actually do it. Some people are limbic people. Limbic people is the midbrain of a human being, and it's where fight and flight response is, it's where emotions lie. The people who live on that part of their brain, they want to feel right all the time. They want life to feel comfortable with them, and they don't want to be disrupted. And they are down here with the people who are big time with family feelings and big time with what we've done in the past, where we live, what our religion is, and all that kind of stuff. So the lower part of this diagram is always about, if you score down there, you don't want to change. You like it is. And this is mostly rural thinking in the country. Up here, assimilators are people who grab all information coming their way and they try to put it in context so they can use it in business here or they can become innovators here. So they're willing to use the left and right brain, but their goal is to assimilate the knowledge that's useful for them to get what they need so they can go forward. So while these guys are willing to stand pat, these guys are willing to change. And the only thing I'm telling you, though, is that to the degree that over time you can become knowledgeable on some of these patterns of thinking, and you can have the fun, like some of us do, of trying to pinpoint each other and calling them names by saying, you son of a gun, you ENFP, you're always doing that to me. I'm trying to explain the finances here, and you seem to care about the people involved. We don't care. The finance say they have to be fired, and they have to be fired tomorrow. And that's as simple as it needs to be. And we have those kinds of arguments in our businesses. And this one just brings up the fact that our value system that I proposed later on is distributed in here, but it's not necessarily attached to any particular place. People could love freedom and democracy, and they can love it down here. All the stuff we're talking about is personal when it's all said and done. And if you don't have a sense for the personal, you're really missing out on how your ability to learn and live and work with other people. That's it. So, what does that tell you about you and what you should be and how you should be? And this is our chart we always go back to, and maybe it tells you that you need to put more time on financial security, that this kind of stuff up here, it's a little bit too hard to deal with. It's out of your pay grade. Let's just work on getting the money and getting the wealth to flow. I mean, you can literally say, I have priorities here and I cannot make psychological changes part of my life right now. Or somebody could say, I'll be damned, like I said, at 42 years old. Where the hell did these people come from? And I didn't know that they had all these ways of living their lives differently. Happened to me, it literally happened to me. So, as usual, we end up with, now what are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do with your life and career? This stuff turns people's heads because this stuff makes people say, I've been living the wrong life. I'm not authentic because I did not believe some of the things I'm learning about myself that I really thought that way. But now that I see the people who make up these things that you have to fill out, I'm always scoring where I didn't think I was. I didn't know myself. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to change myself in my next life. And I'm going to do something like, maybe I'll become a minister. Maybe I was wrong all those years. I was following those New York City values. Maybe I needed to follow some other set of values coming out of Tennessee or somewhere. I mean, I'm just talking off the top of my head. I have family in Tennessee and they don't like that kind of talk. They don't like New Yorkers, right? And New Yorkers don't like Mississippians either. And, but it's real. That's who we are. So my question for you is, what are you going to do about it? It's time for you to change your mind about your life, yourself. And that's the end of that.